Hi, my name is Ken Neunzig, and I'm going to try to share the story of how Mayor Baba came into my life. So, I was born in upstate New York in 1945. My parents at that time were just starting to run a summer camp. So, in the winters, we went to North Miami Beach, where my dad worked at hotels. So I grew up changing schools a lot, and most of my close friends actually were just summertime friends because we had cabins that the same families came every year, so my friends would be, come back each year, and it was like a big family in a sense. So it was really quite idyllic in many ways. We had our own little lake and boats and candy store and recreation. We did hikes and ball games and all of that. So I used to love the outdoors. We camped out a lot and things like that. And but in school, away from that summer friend, my few friends in the summer, I was fairly shy. Being sort of outside, I was intelligent but not that social. And I'd also had some serious traumas as a young child. I was bitten by a rabid fox when I was a year and a half old, and which our dog killed, and so it was tested and found to have rabies. And then when I was maybe 3 or 4, I fell out of a hayloft onto a concrete floor and I guess cracked my skull and whatever, so somehow I survived. Anyway, so I ended up the last few years living in upstate New York outside of Oneonta, and graduated high school there, ended up going to a local college. Because school was so easy for me, I was considered one of the most intelligent kids in the school, I guess. It was a small school. I never learned any study habits, and my parents hadn't gone to college. So when I got to college, I had more fun than studying, I guess. And I joined a spelunking club and had a few friends. Anyway, long story short, I ended up dropping out of college after a year. Found myself somehow in the Air Force, 1964 to 65, and which turned out to be a blessing because I got out with an honorable discharge after only a year and didn't have to confront the draft, as Vietnam was just starting then. In the meantime, I'd started, you might say, getting a social conscience, reading a little more widely. I'd been pretty sheltered in my upbringing. And I was never a partier. I was quite shy. I never had a girlfriend, really. Didn't like to drink. So after getting out of the service, I had read about the free speech movement in the papers out in California. And in those days, California was the place to go where things were happening. So I ended up taking a bus out there in the fall of 1965 to Berkeley. Eventually met some local, 2 years later people would call hippies, and moved into kind of a crash pad house. And by this point I'd been reading Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts and people like that, and had heard a little bit about psychedelics. And so when I mentioned it to these people, they offered to give me some LSD. So February 7th, 1966, it was still legal. I had my first LSD trip and also met my first lover that night. I sort of transcended my shyness, I guess. Discovered if I didn't go after the girls, they'd come after me, maybe. Anyway, of course, the relationship didn't last too long. That's another story. But I became quite enamored of spiritual seeking through the use of LSD mostly. And over the next 2, 3, 4 years, I guess. But in the meantime, the following winter, I went off to Mexico and for about 3 or 4 months. And then on the way, came back up through San Francisco, and so I was in Haight-Ashbury in the spring of the Summer of Love in '67. And so when I first saw Meher Baba's name and photo that I remember, it was in a paper called the San Francisco Oracle, which was published locally there about that time, and it just said, Meher Baba loves you. And I had no idea who this person was or what it meant. The only other reference I had really was there was an interview with people like Alan Watts and Timothy Leary. And at one point in the interview, Timothy Leary says, well, these Meher Baba people that say no drugs, but they all came to him through drugs. So that was sort of my context. And, didn't really think much of it, except I kept the paper, and so I had that. I would see that once in a while when I was looking through it. Because I had such a good situation in upstate New York, I would go back there every summer. The only requirement was that I shave and cut my hair and help my dad run the camp. So I guess the next important, a few things happened. So I was becoming, at this time I was reading Lao Tzu and Bhagavad Gita, various things, slowly learning more about Eastern mysticism, trying to meditate, but not really having much experience or knowing how to do it. And then in the winter of 1968, Look magazine had a cover on Maharishi and Transcendental Meditation with a picture of meditators at Yale. And the Beatles, of course, had become meditators with Maharishi about that time. But there was, I was struck by a young woman in the front row of the photo on the cover of the Look magazine, and had this feeling, well, she could be a meditator, maybe, because I tended to be skeptical of things in groups. I had seen different groups out in California, the Hare Krishnas and other things, and wasn't really drawn to them necessarily. So long story short, I went over to Yale and found out when they were having their next course, and asked one of the lead meditators for a place to stay that night, and who should walk into the bathroom when I was brushing my teeth was the woman from the cover of the magazine. So turned out she wasn't even a meditator, actually. She was just his girlfriend. So, but I did learn meditation. And then, strangely enough, they have a regulation, or they did at the time, that you were not to use any drugs, including marijuana, for 2 weeks beforehand. And when I was using psychedelics, I would use them for a period of time and then not, and depending when they were available or whatever. So, but right after that, some local high school kids offered me some psychedelic, and that night I decided, well, let me try this mantra meditation that I had just learned, and I had such a powerful experience. I can only describe it as like a higher intelligence, which was so shocking and startling in a sense. And I didn't, of course, didn't know how real it was or whatever, but it kind of opened me to the idea that there could be higher levels of consciousness. I was kind of just a Taoist. I had a sense of an unconscious divine, if you want to call it that, nature behind creation, a oneness. But I never thought about it as having a higher consciousness than what appeared in animals or humans or whatever. And so that was in my mind when later that year, in the fall of 1968, I was passing through New York City, no place to spend the night, and just killing some time before I went to spend the night at the bus station to catch a bus the next day, when these two young men walking down, I think it was 6th Avenue, stopped and asked me if I had the time. I just kind of laughed and said no, I was not into time at all. And then after a slight pause, they said, would you like to go to a meeting? So having nowhere to go, why not? And they start telling me about Meher Baba. And this man is having this meeting, and so we're going down the street, and they immediately start telling me Meher Baba is God in human form. So of course my reaction was, well, inwardly thinking we're all God. This apparently some other cult group snatched me up, but whatever, we'll see. But as I'm thinking that, the one fellow says to me, walking down 6th Avenue, he says, I know we're all God, but he was really conscious God. Words to that effect. And it was like he had read my mind, So I thought, maybe there's something to this. Anyway, we go to the meeting, and it turned out it was Harry Kenmore, who I knew nothing about, but he was a blind chiropractor from New York City, and he had just come back from being with Baba, literally a day or two before. And it was only recently, actually, when the book Harry came out, and I read it, and there's a transcript of his talk, and I remembered some of the things he had said, and realized the date was actually my birthday. It was my 23rd birthday. And at the time, I never put it together, because if you knew Harry or you read the talk, a lot of it was way over my head. I had no idea what he was talking about. But at the end of the talk, he boomed out the part of our prayer, which he was known for, Baba's prayer, and I like to say I didn't know what the hell it was, but it was something. You could feel Baba's presence, which I didn't have that name for it then in the experience, but it was it was overpowering, really. And so later, after the meeting, 3 young men we went off to a coffee shop to talk some more. And at one point, one of them had a Meher Baba picture on his lapel, and as they were talking to me about Baba, I glanced at Baba's photo, and it was like, well, it was just a little glimpse of his divinity. And you can't really put words on it. Some kind of recognition. But we went back, they put me up for the night and went back to their apartment in Brooklyn or Queens, and of course they had a lot of large Baba black and white photos, and so I tried to sort of relate to them and look at them, but it was all too much. I couldn't really connect. And I went on my way the next day, and that was really Baba planting the seed, I guess, within me. And so I continued my seeking, and the following would have been about, I think it was the following spring, a friend gave me the discourses, which I can only assume he got from another Baba person. He wasn't into Meher Baba, and someone had given him these books. And so I started reading more of Meher Baba's writings, and maybe arguing with him inwardly, and slowly realizing, well, maybe he does know what he's talking about. So, say my heart had been touched, but my ego and my mind and intellect was a ways to go yet. So, and then so this is the summer of '69. So in July, I was just remembering, in '69, I hitched down and saw the Apollo 11 launch at Cape Kennedy, and then hitched back home in time for the landing on the moon. And then in August, we heard of this thing called the Woodstock Music and Art Fair, I think it was called, and bought tickets for that and made plans to meet friends there. Fortunately, I had a tiny little motorcycle that I'd gotten that spring, and so I, on the Friday afternoon, motorcycled right into the center of Woodstock and met my friends somehow, and we had a fine time, no drugs, no mud, didn't go hungry. We did go skinny dipping, sort of. But the most memorable part was somehow I noticed there was a line of moving people on Saturday night in front of the stage, and so I ended up in the front row when Janis Joplin came on, but then followed by The Who, which I had only vaguely heard of. And they did The Whole of Tommy, which of course was somewhat inspired by Meher Baba. And it was kind of mind-blowing, to say the least. And then later that summer, I didn't see any of the Meher Baba posters at Woodstock, but two friends got Don't Worry Be Happy cards there, and later that summer they gave them to me and said, you might like this. And then I saw the album Tommy, and it said Avatar of Meher Baba. So all these things were drawing me more and more into interest in Baba. So a year or two went by. I happened to hear about Richard Alpert, then known as Baba Ram Das, giving a talk in New York. I went to that. Fairly strong experience with him, and got an original hand-printed copy of Be Here Now after that, and which had, of course, Meher Baba in it. He talked about Meher Baba in all of his books, really. And then in 1971, I bought a copy of Listen Humanity, which I saw in the bookstore. Got a copy of God Speaks, and somewhere I heard of the center, I guess in Listen Humanity, maybe in the back or something, and wrote to the center. Got information back. And by then I had pretty much decided, you know, this person knows what he's talking about. I was kind of, you might say I was kind of fanatical in my seeking. So like when I was doing TM, instead of 20 minutes twice a day, I might do it for hours, you know? Or instead of, so Be Here Now came with a lot of photos of different gurus and masters and things. And so I would meditate on them. And somehow Meher Baba's photo always needed to be in the center or at the top if it was a pyramid. And I might gaze on one and feel like I'm getting a vibe. I know, you know, kind of get a sense of this person, where he's at or where. But with Meher Baba, it was always just, his eyes were just a doorway into the infinite. No demands, no head trip, just pools of love. Just that awareness, that consciousness there. And as I say, more and more reading his writings, I began to realize it was not irrational, it was very far out, a lot of it, but it was very, you know, of one piece. It all made sense. But you accepted some basic premises and were open to them. And so by the fall of '71, I pretty much realized I needed to commit to this if I was going to make any more progress. At the same time, drugs had become, you know, sporadic and also less and less useful, and slowly realized that what Meher Baba had said about drugs was exactly right, of course. And I was circling toward madness in some ways, and it definitely saved me from that. And also became clear that no matter how high you got, you always came down the next day, and there you were. It wasn't really, you know, as Meher Baba said, it might give you a little glimpse of a shadow that there's something more. But you could never achieve it through the use of drugs. So about that time, I became engaged, and was married for a number of years. We had a daughter. But I was always kind of conflicted between my spiritual seeking and my sort of monk side of my nature, loner, and marriage, and so we ended up breaking up. And a few years later, but in jumping back a little, so I was married in 1972. In 1973, I finally took a bus in the spring of '73 down to Myrtle Beach for the first time. Came to the Mayor Spiritual Center. And was met at the bus station by Fred Netter Winterfeld. And, you know, anyone that's been to the center knows what that experience is like a little bit. It was just so warm and loving and yet open. And of course, when I told people I was from upstate New York, not too far from Schenectady, they all said, well, you must go to Darwin and Jean Shaw's. They've been having Nirvana meetings since the 1930s, and they've, you know, had a lot of time with Nirvana. And then I remember that actually in 1971, in the fall of '71, I was visiting Albany, where my fiance at the time was living and working. And there was a big poster up one day at the university for Darwin Shaw speaking about Meher Baba, of the film. And so I took my fiance and her friend to going to it, and we got over there though, and there had been a bomb scare, and all the rooms were emptied out into this big common plaza. So we wandered around until we found this group of people sitting there, and it turned out it was Darwin and Jean and people that had come for the talk, or other people. So it became famous as the infamous bomb scare meeting. A number of other people were there that I met years later, but the strange thing was I didn't really connect too much with the film or with Darwin's talk, you know. But when we were leaving, I noticed the poster was starting to get ripped. It was a nice large-size poster with a lovely photo of Meher Baba from the 50s. And so I took it down and took it home. And years later, of course, when I went back to New York then in '73, I called in and started going to the meetings maybe every 6 weeks or so. And one time they were discussing that meeting, that talk they gave, that public talk, and Jean complained about people stealing the posters. So I had to raise my hand and confess that I was, unfortunately, I still have the poster, but I'd cut off, just had the photograph, I cut off the part about the dates and who was talking way back then. So anyway, I started going to the center, I don't know, maybe once a year, year and a half. And by 1975, of course, then everyone was talking about India and all his disciples there. So in 1975, in July, I managed to con my employee, which was the state of New York at the time, into giving me 3 weeks off, without them realizing it, and went to India for the first time. Of course, in 1975, it was very much a different world, you know. It would take days to book a phone call even, and mail took 2-3 weeks. And so I was kind of a babe in the woods, and it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was overwhelming, but it certainly was an experience. And of course, that in those days, Mehrabad and Mehrabad were quite rural and in the country, and you only stay at Mehrabad for 4 nights. So otherwise we were staying in town at the Dowlet or another hotel. Or if you had a little money, I guess you could stay at, what was the name of the place? I'm forgetting that, but anyway. So, a couple of experiences of India the first time in '75. July '75, July 10th, of course, was the anniversary of Baba's keeping silence, and the 50th anniversary. And so I and a few other people that were there biked out to Maribad that day, bicycles, and was just hanging out in silence. People were keeping silence, and was inside the Samadhi in Baba's tomb with just one or two other people at this point. It must have been early afternoon maybe, or mid-afternoon, when all of a sudden someone was at the door and gesturing, one of them in Mandali, kind of gesturing. And by the time we realized they were saying, "Come out," because we're all keeping silence, I think it was probably Mommy appeared and gestured, "No, just stay where you are." And with that, Mara, Baba's beloved, closest woman disciple, appeared in the doorway and threw herself on the marble. It was so swift, so just one movement. And I was sitting cross-legged, literally, right there on the side, the marble slab, on the right side. And I'm not sure I can even remember it now, but in that moment, I experienced, and I can only describe it like it had been an earthquake. And there had also been lightning that struck the tomb simultaneously. It seemed like the uniting of heaven and earth, in a sense, you might say. It was such a reverberation, and I realized it was inward, but it was so intense, it seemed outward. It seemed like it was actually happening. And it was so inward, I didn't tell anybody for years, really. I was just stunned, I guess. So what it meant, I have no idea. I suppose it helped me appreciate who Mara was, because I remember then, and then when I went back in '82, the last time I saw her, I felt just at a distance, it was like she was so far beyond and above anything I could relate to. And of course she was friendly with men by that point and everything, and we sat on the porch and heard her tell stories and everything, but she never embraced or shook hands with many. And I suppose I felt a little unworthy or something, but hey, Bob had given me enough blessings, I wasn't going to cry about it. But I just never felt a connection with Mara, really. Any sense of who she really was. And then a few days, just a couple days later, of course, was Dooney Day, July 12th. And so I'd heard what the Dooney is, where they build a fire in the pit and people take a stick of wood and dip it in ghee or clarified butter, and you throw it in the fire and you embody something you would like to be rid of normally. Might be a small thing like smoking or getting angry too easily, whatever. But being the sort of fanatic I was, I guess, I thought, somehow I got this thought, well, why not just throw in my mind? Because, all the problems come from the mind, right? If we're really spirit, and realization is when we transcend our mind, the annihilation of the limited mind. And of course I realized this is probably not a good idea. because people, of course, people would tell stories of you throw things in, and then your life becomes an upheaval, or you know, it happens, or you're forced, you know, something happens. Anyway, so, but I thought, well, if I'm serious, I should do it though. So the Dooney came. I threw my mind in the Dooney. And about that same time, I don't know if it was a day or two after, or then, my chance came to stay at Mehrabad, Lower Mehrabad, in that one white building there, right between Old Mandali Hall and the Jopti, Baba's cabin. And there were 2 or 3 other people there, one woman who was a nurse. Anyway, I'm staying at Mehrabad, and all of a sudden I became extremely ill, which isn't too uncommon. You know, I started basically throwing up, having diarrhea, couldn't keep anything down basically, I guess, and was getting weaker and weaker and just trying to keep hydrated, but was having trouble. And so Padre Baba's Mandali, who's also a homeopathic doctor, came in and gave me some little pills to take. Well, I learned later that in homeopathy they often increase the symptoms in order to work out the disease. So after that, I literally was crawling out of bed to just get to the outhouse outside the door, you know, when I could. And at the same time, I was having this incredible headache. And I've been fortunate in my life, I basically never get headaches. And at that point, I don't think I very seldom if ever. But it was so strong that it was, I basically could just bear it without screaming or, you know, moaning, whatever. And it just went on and on and on for hours and hours. It seemed like a day, maybe. Meantime, I'm lying in this bed and this mosquito netting and wireframe bed, and this gruff man had given me medicine, and so I'm sort of starting to hallucinate. Like I feel like in one of those 1940s movies where they were in the jungle somewhere and the witch doctor was taken care of. And later the nurse told me she thought I might die. But I had the feeling I didn't have a good enough karma to die in Mehrabad. So I wasn't worried about that, but finally it struck me that this is my mind burning up. I'd thrown it in the Dooney, and my mind was burning up. And that's what it felt like. So, you know, I was sort of 2 thoughts. One was, well, you asked for it, so go with it. And the other was, no, I'm not sure I'm ready for this, after all. And I don't know if I thought of it then, but, you know, it reminds me of the story of the potter and the 2 pots, where someone asked Baba, why don't you just give us realization if you can do it so easy? And the story is basically, a man has 2 dirty pots, and one fellow says he'll clean it in a day, and the other fellow says, you have to give me a couple of weeks. And the fellow that takes a couple of weeks, he uses all different techniques to remove the crud and the various things that are, you know, on the pot. The other fellow just takes it and sticks it in the fire and burns everything off it. But the pot that was put in the fire then becomes brittle and is of no use. So Baba has explained that in the same way, if we were just, you know, had our minds burned away, we would be of no use in the world, spiritually or any other way, I guess. And so maybe that was a good excuse for realizing that I was not strong enough to just have my mind burned away. So I said, I guess, you know, I forget how I put it, but you win, Baba. Sorry about that. You know, I realize I'm not ready to have my mind burned away. And within a short time, I don't remember whether it was minutes or an hour or so, the headache went away and I started getting better. So those were some of the two most memorable experiences. And of course, just spending time with Mani and Erich and the other Mandali, and Bandari, etc. The 2.5 weeks or so that I was there. And then in 1982, I went back with, in the meantime, I'd gotten engaged again. I had to learn my lesson with a young woman, and she became interested in Mayo Baba immediately after I met her, so that was kind of the appeal there, among other things. And we went to India for a few months in 1982. And it was a challenging trip in some ways. Literally on the bus ride to Ahmednagar, my fiancée lost her handbag that had our plane tickets in it and her passport. And so we spent the next 3 months dealing with that in a way and had to go back to Mumbai, et cetera, et cetera. But Bao sort of took us under his wing and took us to the police station and all that kind of stuff. But I ended up not traveling. So another strong experience I should mention, actually. So in 1989, I was single. I would come to Myrtle Beach for the winter, and early part of May, I decided to go back upstate New York. And unknown to me, right after I left, word came that Mara was quite ill in India. And so I was back up in a little trailer with no electric or running water, just a little trailer that I had purchased a couple of years before. Actually, way back in 81, I think, but on a friend's land. And I had been helping a person in Myrtle Beach who was very into Mara, felt very connected to her. And so I was starting to, I thought I should make a little more effort at relating to Mara, because again in 82 I hadn't really felt a strong connection. But I put up, the only picture I had, I guess, was in a little newsletter. So it wasn't that good of a reproduction or anything, but black and white, I put it up on the wall of my trailer. And I had Bobby's picture. And one day I was just passing by and I glanced at her photo. And all of a sudden, it was like it came alive. And she was there. I could sense her presence. And where Baba's image was always just loving and warm and open, hers was very loving, but I also felt this, not judgment, but challenge, let's say. Like she was saying, oh, you say you're a Baba lover, you love Baba, but are you loving him as best you can? Are you really trying to love Baba? Something like that. And I guess I sort of broke down in tears, just feeling that connection. And then a few days later, I got a postcard from a friend in Myrtle Beach saying that Mara had died. Had joined her beloved, as we say. And when the next time I went back to India in 1990, I told the Mandali, Mani especially, the other women, and they said they were quite touched. Said it felt like that Mara had left them, but her spirit had gone out to the whole world. And even though I didn't feel any connection to her, she had blessed me. Yes, in the meantime, life went up and down, and another marriage that didn't work out. But, you know, the hard times are often the times that produce the most growth. So hopefully I was living and learning these past 50 years. So when I was not married, the years I wasn't married, I was mostly living pretty simply, you know, very little income, helping friends, or living in a cabin in the woods. And in 1990, I was able to go back to India for an extended stay, 4 or 5 months. And I saw that Air Italia was offering a 10-day stopover in Italy for an extra $40. And so, having always felt drawn to St. Francis, I wanted to go to Assisi sometime. I took advantage of that, and I went to Assisi. Ended up being 8 of those 10 days. It was so hard to leave once I got there. And spending some time in the cave that Baba spent time in, up on the mountain behind Assisi. And had a very strong experience there. Spent a number of hours there into the night. And anyone that's been there or seen photos knows it's really not even a cave. It's just a rock shelter, and very, very, very small. You can't stand up in it or anything. But just being in there in the dark with my eyes closed, it felt like it was a tremendous cathedral, just this massive whole space. So that kind of encouraged me to stay there, but I had been up, I literally went there direct from the airport pretty much, and train up to Assisi, and walked all the way up the train station through the town, up the hill, so I was pretty tired. But I was a bit younger then. And but then as time went on, I began to experience this intense, almost frightening presence or presences. Of course, I remember that Baba said he had a meeting with all the masters there in the cave. And I don't know whether it was just my whatever, but I guess it kind of felt like they were saying, "Get your butt out of here, boy." You know. And so I ended up leaving, and it was getting cold too. I ended up leaving and walking down the hill. But as I said, I ended up spending about 8 days there, just going to the various churches and the Franciscan places out of town. Still a very, very special place. And then, let's just say after having my heart broken one more time, when I thought, no more of this relationship stuff, and yet it's lonely being without it, unless you're made for that. I always felt sort of in between, I guess. Seemed like Baba took pity on me or whatever. That's a whole long story which I won't tell, but it was certainly divinely guided and blessed, I think, that I met my wife Donna. And that was in May of 1995, so 24 years now. We've been together since our first date, basically. We were married on the anniversary of the first date 3 years later. She was kind of quiet, and so on our first date, near the end, or later in the afternoon, we were in Oneonta, where she had moved 3 or 4 years before, and these double rainbows appeared. And I thought they had sent me messages with rainbows before, but these rainbows were something special. They literally lasted for 20 minutes or longer against this pitch black sky. And, I mean, people in the town talked about it for weeks. we actually went into a restaurant and were eating and looking out the windows, and rainbows were still there. Finally, I started like freaking out a little bit, thinking, maybe this just isn't a random person I've met, a nice person, just meeting. Maybe I should pay attention here. Little did I know, 24 years later, we'd still be together. And life has just been, doing one's best, learning more and more about Baba in a sense. There's always more to learn, more to deeper understanding. Because for me, it's just that pure love and consciousness. After I had that strong first experience in 1968, I never thought about meeting Baba in person for some reason. I guess it was always just an inner thing, and I didn't know much. So when I heard that he had dropped his physical form later that summer, I didn't hear until later in '69 that he had passed away in January. It wasn't really a shock or any big change in a sense. It always been an inner connection. And it's still the same, it hasn't changed at all. There were periods where one time I was renting an old farmhouse with a friend. We were both between marriages, and I had some nice Baba posters on the wall, and we're just spending time with him, sometimes hours and hours. And if you give your heart enough, if you give your consciousness enough, he's there. Times almost like he was going to step off the poster. I've never seen Baba physically or walking around like a few people have, of course, but no doubt of his presence and guidance in so many ways. Little things and big, just learning trust and learning to listen to intuition rather than the mind all the time. Last, after my dad passed away, my mom had died about 20 years ago now. My dad passed away about a little over 8 or 9 years ago. What is this? So, yeah, almost 9 years ago. Some money became available, and all of a sudden we found ourselves buying a house in Myrtle Beach. So we've had really 7 wonderful years of just helping at the center and meeting so many great people that live here and visit here, and people that we've met in India, etc. And then last year, things changed, and all of a sudden it seemed like it was time for a different chapter in life. So that chapter hasn't unfolded yet. We'll just see what's next. On the spiritual path, you kind of have to learn to take it day to day. Really, of course, Baba's really teaching the same that all the masters and all the saints have taught, that the divine lies within us, and we really just need to uncover it. And recover it with all our desires and fears and longings, and wanting the world to be different than it is, instead of realizing that the world is trying to tell us something all the time, that the world is nothing but divine being, and it's speaking to us if we can learn to listen. Still learning to listen. Thank you for this opportunity to share. And I still like to run barefoot in the surf, or enjoy a good sunset and a simple meal. guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you.